For the classroom observations, we went to Delaware Elementary School, and I was in Mrs. Beckham's second grade classroom. About 90% of the students are on the free and reduced lunch program. This makes Delaware Elementary School one of the highest poverty-stricken schools in the EVSC school system. Based on my classroom observations, I would say that Mrs. Beckham believes in a student-centered classroom. The students' desks were arranged in small groups, and I never saw a beza reader. I believe from my observations that she uses aspects of all three types of student-centered learning theories. I believe that all of the second grade teachers participate in guided reading at the same time, and some of the students go to different classrooms for guided reading. Mrs. Beckham had students from other classrooms during IDR time in her classroom. She emphasized with her group to read with expression. Students use reading logs during their IDR time. The lesson that I observed falls nicely with the idea of meaning-making processes. Mrs. Beckham was teaching the students on making connections while she was reading a story to her students. These observations would fall under information processing learning theory. While reading, Mrs. Beckham wrote her connections on the board. She used 3 of her thoughts to model the different types of connections and had the class determine the rest. Students would work on the skill during their IDR. The lesson falls under constructivism because she constructs student knowledge. There was evidence that Mrs. Beckham also used aspects of the social linguistics learning theory. On the wall, she had contracts for reading workshop and writing workshop on big paper. However, I never saw her implement these workshops in the classroom. During the second observation, I observed Mrs. Beckham giving the students a reading comprehension test. Unfortunately, I did not see many times when the students talked because they were either in a teacher-directed lesson or they were having IDR time. When students did talk, it was during a redo part of a lesson. Before she gave the test, she gave students verbal instructions. She told them to write their name on their test, and that the first story was about ants, and that there were 3 questions. She told them that she would read aloud and that they needed to read along silently. She read the questions and the multiple choice answers twice. During the global observations, students worked on efferent listening because students listened to the story as she read the book. The thoughts written on the board were exclusively her own. The second observation showed that the focus was on critical listening because they had to comprehend the stories that she read and determine the correct answer. During the reading observations, students were doing an activity on people, places, and things. There were words on the Promethean board, and students had to drag them to their matching category. Students would read these words silently as another student came up to draw. Mrs. Beckham would read the words after they were placed by the student. By the time we did the reading observation, Mrs. Beckham had a big paper summarizing each type of making connections on the wall. Also on the wall, she had a reading workshop contract and information to help students determine if a book is at their appropriate reading level. I also found that she had a sight word bingo game. She had an I do, we do, you do lesson on how characters have different points of view. For I do, she read the text, questions, and answers. For we do, students read with her and talked to each other about the question. For you do, she had them reread a story and answer questions. In previous observations, Mrs. Beckham modeled proper reading when she read books and other texts aloud to the class. Students have a reading journal, and at least 2 times, students were given a specific task to work on in their journal while they read during IDR. These tasks worked on students' comprehension. Mrs. Beckham had a lot of evidence of writing in her classroom. However, while I was there for observations, the only writing I actually saw her students do was writing in their reading journal. However, the material in our classroom shows that writing is an important aspect for her students. During my first focused observation, I looked at students' writing in their reading journal. The students' handwriting varied. One student wrote with very large letters but neatly, while another student wrote with large spaces between their letters. Their writing was based on what they read during IDR time. Mrs. Beckham had a word wall that was alphabetized. She referred to the word wall as words to write about. On big paper, she had a writer's workshop contract and summarized information on a personal narrative and information on informative writing. I found on one of her many shelves that she has several items that could be used for writing lessons. She has some copies of a children's dictionary. Another thing that she had were letter and letter combination tiles. She could use these tiles for making words activity. Students do have spelling words, but I never saw a spelling lesson. I did look at a spelling worksheet that a student had on their desk. The worksheet had several different activities on them to work on. It included hide the words in a picture, draw a picture to match a word, alphabetize words, and write a letter to a friend. One thing that I learned while in the classroom was the reading journal task that she gave them during IDR appeared to be too advanced for the students because students would often change books instead of working on the task. I think that if I gave second graders a task, I would have them use the same book for the entire time. These observations at Delaware School have been an opportunity for me to see educational theories put into practice in a classroom setting. I was not able to gain very many insights into literacy learning due to the times we were in there. However, I could tell that Mrs. Beckham was implementing many different literacy teaching methods.